hear my introduction, no?
Yeah.
No, you do? Sorry?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you well.
Okay, so you can continue.
I can what? Sorry.
Okay, so do you hear my introduction? No, in the beginning? No. Okay,
No.
so probably I just unmute. Okay.
Oh,
So,
sorry.
okay. Yeah. Okay, so welcome to graduate EC graduate seminar. Okay, and this is our first seminar, and then I am Dr. Chen. I'm the graduate program director for electrical and computer engineering, and we are lucky to have Gabriel to be our speaker. And Gabriel is a foreign student from Mexico City. He received his bachelor degree in physics from the Autonomous Metropolitan University in Mexico City. Then he got his master degree in physics at ODU. Right now, he is a PhD student in our department, and then he also works in the Jefferson Lab. Then his research focus is accelerator physics. And then welcome, and then let Gabriel start to talk about his research. You can start, yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Sorry for the interruption. By the way, if you are not a speaker, please mute your microphone, okay?
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. As you heard, my name is Gabriel Palacios, and I'm going to talk about the beam filter spin rotator energy upgrade. I hope you all can see my presentation. I hear some clickety clacketing over there. I don't know what it is. I think it's a keyboard, just in case. All right, so I'm going to start now. First, let me introduce to you the Thomas Jefferson National Accelerator Facility. This is a facility located in Newport News, Virginia, not far from where I am, Norfolk. Can you guys hear me? Yes, I see in the chat that somebody can.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is a laboratory located in Newport News, Virginia, not far from here. And you can see here on the right side of your screen where I'm pointing out with the laser pointer that it's a cartoon of the main accelerator that it's called CBAF, the Continuous Electron Beam Accelerator Facility. The first part of the accelerator, it's called the injector. This is where the electron beam is generated, and it's represented here by this green little box. That is where we have the injector and the device that I'm going to talk about that's called the beam filter. The thing is that electrons, being subatomic particles, possess a quantum property called the spin. And as the beam travels around the accelerator, it interacts with the magnetic fields of some of our devices, and it changes its direction. So the experiments of our laboratory, some of the experiments of our laboratory require the spin to be aligned in a specific direction. And in order to do so, we use the device called the beam filter. We set up the direction at the injector exit in such a way that by the time it reaches the experimental holes, it's completely aligned to the experiment's necessities. So let's keep going. I like to start always with a little history. I'm a history buff. So first, Wilhelm Wien invented this device in 1898, and he used it to measure the charge to mass ratio for the electrons. He actually did this a year later than the famous Thomson measurement. And it's reported in literature to be somewhat more elegant and more precise because the electric fields were generated at the same time. Now, afterwards, Hertzog and Henneberg in 1934 developed the first order theory to model the charge-particle interaction with the fields inside of it. And then here, I mentioned only 3 examples of 3 different types of use for this device. One, it's a monochromator in the 60s, an energy analyzer also in the 60s, and a mass filter in 72. There are a couple of other uses that have been given to this device along the way. And I think something that I like to mention in this slide is that you can see that there's a huge gap from the invention to like the first uses that I reported. The thing is that it's not really clear if there are some reports of the device being used in different parts of the world, but sometimes they don't quote the original paper. So it is not really clear if it was invented at the same time by independent people or they just didn't quote it. So yeah, interesting history fact. And here on the top right, I'm showing a picture that it's taken from Steiner and Ackerman's paper. And there's a lot of info in it, but the reason why I put it there is to show that the design that we use at CBAF, it's originally from SLAC and has also been replicated at other laboratories in Mainz University, at MIT, and at Sept University. So in order to see what it actually is, let's keep going. So here I'm showing a cross-section, a lateral isometric view of the lateral cross-section of the device here on the top right. And in the middle, you can see the same cross-section, but we're viewing it dead on. This is a 3D model that I generated using SolidWorks of CBAF's 100 kilo electron volt in filter. And you can see here on the bottom left, this little cartoon of what this thing is all about. That it's generating an electric field that in this case is pointing upwards in the vertical direction, generating a magnetic field that is perpendicular to that electric field. And at the same time, they are both perpendicular to the particle velocity to the electrons that traverse the device. This is a 42 centimeter device. It's highly symmetric. It has cylindric symmetry, as you can see. And the way we achieve these electric and magnetic fields, these properties, it's as follows. The purple region is the vacuum enclosure, as you can see here also on the top. This is an ultra-high vacuum enclosure that has to be compatible with the beamline. Then inside of it, we mount, using mounting insulators, we mount two high voltage plates that are made of steel. And then in order to feed them with bias, in order to put a bias on them, we connect them to high voltage feed-throughs that you can see here. Now this allows us to create the homogeneous electric field in the middle region. And the way we create the magnetic field is by feeding these coils that are a little bit hard to see here, but it's those red regions that you can see here. They're packed into the device. We put a current through them, and that way we generate a magnetic field in a perpendicular direction to the electric field. These are called window frame coil. We also use these blue sections here that you can see are called magnetic mirrors and are used to shape the profile of the magnetic field. We'll see why in a sec. And well, also there's a steel shield and we have flanges in order to mount them and everything. So yeah, this is what the beam filter is all about. Now, we use it for two main objectives. First one is to provide spin angle control, which I'm going to describe more further. I'm going to describe this picture in the following slides. And then the other one is we don't want to change the beam trajectory, which is expressed here as this little red line you can see passes through the middle of the high voltage plates. And yeah, so all of this has to be done for the new energy that it's 200 kilo electron volts, where before was around 100. So let's go to each of these ones in the following slides. First, the easy one. I'm going to talk about the easy one, that it's don't deviate the beam. We know that the beam is made of electrons, and electrons interact with the external electric and magnetic fields via the Lorentz force that you can see here is this expression where Q is the charge of the electron, electric field, the velocity, and the magnetic field, the velocity of the particles and the magnetic field. Now, in order to prevent the trajectory deviation, these two forces have to balance because one pushes downwards and the other one pushes upward. So that's why this expression has to be zero. Now, we know from the setup of the device, as you can see here in the picture in the middle, the arrows represent the electric field, and the magnetic field is here represented just by this little symbol that means that the magnetic field is coming out of the screen. So since we know what the directions of our fields are, and we know that the particle velocity is directed on the z direction, as you can see here, then we can change this expression for an expression of the magnitudes of those values. And this is important because this is what's going to allow us to actually get parameters in order to use the machine that we can use in the actual physical object. And as you can see with this little animation, that's what we expect electrons to do, to pass through it without changing their trajectory. Now, in order to talk about the other part, we're going to have to make a little pause and talk about spin. So what is spin? We know that electrons behave as little point magnetic dipoles in the sense that when they interact with the magnetic field, they try to align to it. There is this analogy that it's being used all the time, that this is almost like the macroscopic intrinsic spin of a sphere that it's rotating around its axis. But this is only an analogy, right? Because we know that electrons are point particles. And since point particles don't have dimensions, we can't really say that they rotate. So for the sake of this presentation, in order to move forward, we have to accept for now that the electron spin, it's a quantum property. And in order to describe it, we need more sophisticated math to model it. So here on the bottom, there's a lot of stuff going on. Please bear with me. There's only 4 slides of math. But I think it's important to show, right? So the thing is, this expression on the left is the type of mathematics that we use to describe the direction of a spin in pointing in an arbitrary direction in a coordinate system that we selected also arbitrary. What this is telling us is that that direction is set by the polar and azimuthal angles. Now, there is a way in quantum mechanics to know how the particle is evolving in time when it interacts with a magnetic field that it's given by this expression on the bottom that is called the, well, by this factor that is called the time evolution operator. And it's related via this little H symbol that it's called the, well, it represents the energy. It's related to the magnetic field and the spin of the particle. You see this little product over there. And there's a lot of stuff going on over here. I don't want to sound too hand-wavy, but it's a little bit difficult to explain these things. So in the end, I want you to focus in these 2 terms. After we let the time evolution operator act on our spin state, what happens is that one of the angles has changed, and it has changed by a quantity that is proportional to the magnetic field. So that's pretty much the way we model it in a simple way. Well, sort of simple way. Now, let me go to the next slide in order to go a little bit deeper. This is a cartoon that where I'm trying to depict the parallel plates that are here in blue. And the magnetic field, the homogeneous magnetic field coming out of the page is represented by those red symbols. Here we're saying, initially we have some spin angle, and after we let the spin pass through the device, the electron pass through our device, we get a final angle. In our machine, electrons are moving really fast, close to the speed of light. So we actually need an extra set of math to model its behavior more properly, which is called relativity. In order to do so, there's another set of equations that are called Thomas VMT equations that describes the change of spin with respect of time. Since this expression shows that time change is expressed by a cross product between the spin vector and this other symbol that it's new. Now, what this symbol means, that is the letter omega, it expresses the spin rotation angle. And again, there's a lot of stuff going on over here in this mathematical expression, but I want to focus your attention to 2 things. The first one is that these are this a linear combination with products of the magnetic field that here is decomposed in its perpendicular and parallel contributions. But we also see this other thing. So what's going on? Okay, so we know because of mathematics and physics that when particles travel closer to the speed of light, in the presence of an external electric field, in the rest frame of the particle, that electric field actually manifests itself as a magnetic field in the rest frame of the particle. So it actually contributes to the rotation of the spin. In our case, actually has the biggest contribution to the rotation of the spin. So, okay, we have a mathematical setup. Everything's good. Now, in order to use it in our machine, because again, that's the part that we care about, we have to make a lot of assumptions in order to change this expression to something that we can use. So after we do that, like high waviness, we obtain an expression that relates the magnetic field with the rotation angle and a couple other factors here that are the intrinsic properties of the electron. There are the mass, speed of light, the relativity correction, normalized to the speed of light velocity, charge the electron charge, and the effective length of our device. So this is the second expression that are going to allow us to actually calculate things for our device. How do we do that? This is an example of the actual numbers that we use for JLab. This is for 100-degree spin rotation angle. And we know what the energy is at the beginning because we modeled it. Actually, as part of my thesis, we made sure that we had a gun that creates an electron beam that has 200 kilo electron volts. Using that knowledge, we start with the kinetic energy expression in a relativistic way. And we use it to calculate this relativistic correction factor. That is this blue number. Now, we use that to calculate the normalized velocity. We have this expression, that is this green number. And then we use the expression that we just obtained for the magnetic field and related to the rotation angle. And bam, we can just plug everything in there, and then we obtain a value for the magnetic field. And this is great because this is the value that allows us to actually calculate what current we have to put through the coils, and we got it. Now let's use this value to calculate the electric field using the expression that we found out at the beginning that comes from the Wien condition, the equilibrium condition. Now this expression relates the electric field and the magnetic field. And since we just calculated it and we know the other one, we can obtain the value for the electric field that's necessary to fulfill the two objectives, right? Keeping the trajectory still and rotating by 100 degrees. So great. Now in the actual machine, we don't control the electric field directly. What we control is the bias voltage on the plates. But we know the plate separation. So since we know the plate separation, it's an easy calculation to obtain the potential value for each plate. This is actually what defines the power supply set point. This is actually what we feed to our machine, and it establishes the electric field. So awesome, we got that. Okay, enough math. This is all great, but in practice, it's a little bit different. In practice, to fulfill the equilibrium condition, the electric field and the magnetic field should behave as step functions in order to produce the zero net force. Here, I'm expressing the electric field as a little blue plot, and the magnetic field is the red plot. And the green plot is the normalized force, the Lorentz force. So we would expect this to be a straight line if the other two would be step functions, but this is not what happens in our device. This is experimentally impossible in our specific geometry because the plates have to be inside the window frame coils. Thus, we can't make them match properly, and like making this exact square is very complicated. So in the end, we are going to obtain vertical deviations of the beam. This is due to the effects of the section here on little red dots that it's called the fringe field region. And the more asymmetric it is, the worse is what we call the vertical kick. The worse it pushes the beam outside of its original trajectory. And here I'm showing here also on the bottom Steiner and Ackermann's plot, because this has been observed before. It's reported in literature. So okay, let's go to the device. Now that we know the theory and we know that there are some quirks that we're going to have to deal with, let's go to the device. So here you can see a picture of Jefferson Lab's, one of Jefferson Lab's existing beam filters. And this is rated for 130 kilo electron volts. We know that we want to go to 200 kilo electron volts. Here, one of our team members, Jay Benesh, produced an Excel spreadsheet, very nice, that allow us to calculate all the parameters that we need for the different types of, for the different energies that we're going to try to address. And the one that we are focusing on is the 200 kiloelectron volt energy. So how do we do that? Okay, now that we know all of our parameters, we are going to go to try to address them, right? So we know that CBAF requires higher energy. As part of my thesis, we updated the electron source. And now we know we have to update the beam filter. Higher energy requires higher electric field, which is the part that I'm focusing on, and higher magnetic field. Higher electric field requires higher voltage. And therefore, after staring at the problem and like talking with all different people in our team and everything, we decided that we need high voltage, new high voltage filters that are rated for the higher voltages that we need. And they have to be compatible with our geometry. So yeah, we can't change everything as we please. We're gonna need new power supplies. We're gonna have to be careful with not producing field emission. That sadly, I'm not gonna be able to talk about this. It's a talk on its own, but yeah, that's a very important factor. And since we're gonna need also higher magnetic field, we're gonna need higher current in the coils. And to prevent them from overheating, we're gonna have to change the cross-section of the coil. All of this we have to achieve without changing too many things, because that implies spending a lot of time fiddling with stuff, and also we're gonna have to spend a lot of money. So awesome, let's go. The easiest way that we have now, that we have the possibility of using amazing technology, we're gonna test it in the virtual world. So the way we proceed about doing this is that we obtain information from the vendors about some parts that we think are good candidates, and I model them in SolidWorks. As you remember, this was the SolidWorks model that I showed you before. Then on the way, other things come up. For example, this part on the left is one of the mounting insulators, and after thinking about it, we decided that maybe it was important to change those two to reduce the field in some regions. And also along the way, we discovered that we had to change other parts that we didn't think about in order to make the new parts compatible with our existing system. And it seems to be like a really simple thing, just this like little metallic contact part that just connects one thing to the other. But it's actually been surprisingly interesting how even simple things like this can become sometimes a challenge. This is actually maybe for you guys that already took electromagnetics, the optimization problem of coaxial cables. It's a fun one to solve mathematically, and you actually end up finding that you can't just make this part like the radius, you can just make it smaller or bigger as whatever you please. The optimization problem tells you that it is just one specific value that allows you to have the electric field to be a minimum on the surface of it. And also we have to control the dimensions of the contact part in order to prevent other problems like field emission. After we model all this stuff, we import it into our electromagnetic simulation software that is called CST-EM Studio. And we simulate the electric field everywhere in our volume. And this is a great step, because now we have the 3D actual machine in a complete way. So you can see here that we use it to analyze how the field behaves on parts that we know might be a little bit problematic. Here, for example, we realized that changing that part that we thought at the beginning was going to be important actually yields some interesting results. And these are things that we're only able to see them through the simulation because it's very hard to imagine. And we also use them to evaluate if the parts that we are suggesting to use are going to fulfill the requirements that we have in order for the machine to not only function properly, but not break, because all of this stuff, it's under ultra high vacuum and it's subjected to very high electric field. So yeah, this is part of my thesis. Now, we use the simulation results that we obtained in that previous slide, and we can obtain the values of the fields inside the part where the electron beam is gonna pass through the device. This is super great because we can actually use those field values in order to simulate using a different type of software that it's called Pulsar Physics Global Particle Tracker. We are gonna use those fields to simulate the interaction of a simulated beam as it passes through the fields that we obtained before. So this is great because it gives us a very robust tool to know what's going to happen before we actually run beam in the machine. So I'm going to focus your attention to the top right. Remember this plot where we were talking that we have a force that it's not like the ideal thing that we were expecting from our previous calculations. So now let's focus on the middle, on the plot in the middle. This is the average transverse vertical position of the electron beam. And as you can see, it starts approaching our beam filter, and as it passes to the fringe regions, it gets deflected downwards. It's unable to recover, and it just goes down all the way over here around 2.5 millimeters. So that is something that we don't want. Not only that, that has been reported in literature before, but we wanted to analyze it more closely. And we also found that there was no, to the best of our knowledge, there is not a study that shows what we are trying to show here. So the question that we gave ourselves initially was, wait a minute, if we calculated everything super good, like what is this happening? It should just give us the straight line, right? So we know that that's not possible because of the fringe fields. And we say, okay, but now we want to know what is going on. So as we were studying our simulations, we realized that in the theoretical calculations that we got before, just to obtain the values that we need for the machine, we are working with the first equation, that is the Lorentz force along the vertical direction. But since now we are solving this model as a 3D shape, as what it is, well, a representation of what it is in the real world, we realize that there's an interplay between the vertical force and the longitudinal force. Not only that, this interplay is coupled to the velocities. You see here the longitudinal velocity is coupled in the first equation and the second equation, and the vertical velocity is coupled in the first equation and the second equation. So what I'm trying to show with the plots on the left and right, which represent the force on the vertical direction on the left and the force on the longitudinal direction on the right, is that the asymmetry that we have due to the fact that our device is not ideal introduces a vertical kick on the a kick on the vertical direction. But not only that, that asymmetry also changes the velocity of the particle because there is a force on the longitudinal direction that is making the particles reduce the speed or augment the speed. And in the end, this tells us, okay, yeah, there's no way this beam is going to recover. So how do we fix it? Well, it was reported in literature, and we found empirically that we can find a value of the electric field that allows us to restore the trajectory by symmetrizing the interplay between the vertical force and the longitudinal force. You see how now the blue plots are nice and symmetric, also here on the right. And then bam, we get the trajectory, even though it has this little bump in the middle, that it's a deviation of around 1 millimeter. At the end, it comes out pretty much on the same position. So this is great because now we know, not only know what was going on before, but now we have an idea of what is happening inside the beam filter. And this particular bump here, it's important for our design because when the beam is generated to the actual energy for the experiment, we have to be very careful of not of preventing the beam from touching the walls. Otherwise, we can get in a lot of trouble. So now we know how much the beam is going to deviate. Even now that we know it's not ideal and everything, we can have some parameters that allow us to know that. And this is really cool. We actually use that information and the software simulations that we have to produce this image that I'm not going to go into too much detail. This is something that we called the beam dynamics mosaic, that we copied from the people from Darmstadt University. And the reason why we copied it is because they developed like this really great way of showing the statistics of our beam and a lot of parameters that allow us to not only compare with the previous results from literature and from other teams, but they also give us statistical information that we can compare once we actually run beam in our device. And we can make predictions about how it's going to behave, and we can publish results yeah, so this is great. We're happy. Now, let's go to the real world. Once we know all this stuff, we gotta build it. So we buy some parts, the parts from the manufacturer that actually worked, we buy them. Other parts we have actually to manufacture them. We send them to JLab's machine shop. We have to polish everything, clean it very neatly. And some of the other parts, we actually have spares from the previous devices, so we have to test them. Sometimes we have to repair a lot of the stuff we have. Give me a second, I need some water. Sometimes, yeah, we have to test and repair some of the stuff that we have. And our team also is very dedicated to assemble the whole thing in a clean room. And we have an independent Serbian alignment group that makes sure that everything's aligned and properly placed as the drawing designs. Then we bake the whole thing. We check for vacuum leaks and we troubleshoot in case something is not going the way we expect it to go, because of course in the real world that always happens. And in the end, we get the final product. This is an awesome picture that I love about our infielder. They dyed it blue because of my hair. And well, yeah, we hook it up to our power supplies. We put some radiation detectors around it, and we go and test it. So this is a screenshot of the way it actually looks in the screen when we are monitoring our tests. So we are in a control room that's separated from the main box where we have the device. We close it up, everything. We try to be really safe about the possibility of creating radiation and everything. And then we sit down in the computer and we control everything from the control room. So I know it looks pretty clunky and weird, but I want to focus your attention to the three red arrows. The first two are the signals that we see as we are changing the values of the power supplies and the plate. Third one is the current of one of the ion pumps that allows us to monitor the vacuum levels inside the device. And the other two are radiation monitors that fine and the coil current. So after we are pacing slowly the voltage on the plates and we're trying to reach the values that we need to operate to, we monitor carefully the current and we obtain some data from the EPICS software. That's the name of the software. From the EPIC software, we obtain some data files. And I would like to mention this other part also because I know there's students from all types of engineering. So here, for example, there's a lot of post-processing that I had to do using my Python abilities and a lot of Googling. And since the original files sometimes are cumbersome or sometimes have like regions of data that we really don't use. For example, when the power supplies are off, if our test is very long, sometimes the tests last for days. So we need to be able to robustly access those files, remove the parts that we don't want, and present them in a way that it's understandable and publishable. So I use my Python abilities, and then we obtain something like this plot that I show on the right that we use for visualization and analysis. Now it's clean, it's nice and neat. Sometimes during that step, we understand things that we couldn't understand when we were just monitoring in real time the signal. And this allows us to do to infer if our device is working properly or if it's not, and to troubleshoot, and in the end to publish our results. So in the end, this is an iterative process. So sometimes when we find something out, we have to come back to the drawing table or to open the machine and like change stuff. Of course, it's engineering, so that's always the case. That's the fun part, I guess. But in the end, we succeeded. So now we're done. The device works. We tested the high voltage setup. We have those simulation results that will allow us eventually, when the pandemic ends, when we are able to install the device in the real machine, we're going to be able to compare the simulation results with the actual measurements and everything. But now we are ready to move forward. Okay, but there's still a lot of stuff to do. So what's next? For example, right now we are focusing on two main things that we can still do while we are working remotely. But it's exploring the possibility of changing the gap between the plates, which will allow us to reduce the bias voltage on the plates, and that help us fight the possibility of field emission. We also change we've also been exploring changing the curvature of regions that have high field gradients. We can also change the magnetic mirror shape to improve the way the fringe region of the fields contribute to the Lorentz force. And we also do that by changing the Rogowski, what is called the Rogowski profile, which is this part on the electrode plates. So those two things allow us to change the symmetry in the fringe region in order to prevent the vertical kick even further. And we also can explore, we've also been exploring the applying an asymmetric bias to the plates. In case one of the plates presents a problem or something, in case one of the plates presents problems while operating it at a high bias, we can also apply the bias differently, achieve the same electric field in the middle, but apply the bias in an asymmetric way in order to operate one of the plates at a lower voltage. So as you can see, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we can still do and that's possible to explore. And of course, running beam, and I put this this frowny face because due to the pandemic, everything got moved around, and we were hoping to be able to run our beam tests earlier, but now we can't. That is really sad, but it's going to happen in the future. Probably I won't be here anymore. And okay, well, finally, there are still a lot of other things related to the beam field there. For example, polarimetry. So what it's like, how do we measure the polarization after we produced it and after we change it? Monte Carlo simulations that also refer to that. We talked about machine learning, like maybe we could use machine learning to optimize the shape of everything and, you know, make nice experiments. Of course, in the virtual world, which is now super possible. The accelerator community is going to keep using this type of devices. Everybody wants to go to higher energies and higher energies. So we're definitely going to need to keep working on it. And of course, the field, the accelerator physics field, is an excellent place for new science students to thrive and develop a career. I can tell you that by experience. It's a great place to work. I added this QR code in the middle, so you can take a picture of it from your screen, and it will send you to Jefferson Lab's website. You can learn all about it. And here, well, I said the accelerator community needs you. We know that there's a lot of engineering students that are going to decide on a path or are still thinking about it. And as you can see here on the picture on the right side, this is just a little section of the CBAF accelerator. And there's a lot of stuff going on. No matter what you're studying, we're probably going to need your expertise. And there's also a lot of rotation of students all the time. So we need people that likes science and physics and accelerator stuff. Well, finally, I want to thank my advisors, Dr. Helmut Baumgart here on the left, and Dr. Matt Walker, this guy, and Dr. Carlos Hernandez Garcia, this guy, for their support and patience. They're great advisors, but I think most importantly, they're fantastic human beings. And that has made this ride to be not only enriching, but super enjoyable. I also want to thank Jefferson Lab's Injector Group for the guidance and for being so cool, to the Department of Energy, Jefferson Lab's Research Foundation, and of course to Old Dominion University. And I want to thank you guys for, well, guys and girls, for listening to me for the past 40 minutes. These are my references, and that's it.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Does everybody have any question? It's open to question and answer. Anybody has any question?
Hi, this is Peter Owen. I was wondering if, obviously, I'm an engineer at Jefferson Lab, and I was wondering if you had any idea when you would be able to test with beam. Obviously, our schedule is changing a lot, but things are starting up. Any idea when those tests would be possible?
Well, the thing is, we have here. I just talked about the continuous beam electron accelerator facility, which is the main accelerator, as you might know. But we also have a different facility that is called the upgraded injector test facility, which is where I mostly run those previous tests. So at the main accelerator, I really have no idea. I think it's gonna take way longer than we thought, but I know they're getting close to the time where they're gonna be able to actually start opening the beamline and changing things. But I honestly have no idea. The thing is that in the upgraded injector test facility, we have a closer window because since it's not related to CBAF's or main work, we can actually put it there in our other beamline and then test it maybe a little bit sooner.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
And Gabriel,
Mm-hmm.
are you able to look at the chat? I think one person is asking about. Did you look at that?
Let me check. How do I do that though? Oh, I see it. Chat. So, oh man, there's a lot of stuff. Gabriel, maybe you want to explain the graph of vacuum response versus applied high voltage. Why does it look like that? How should it look? How should it look like to say, yes, the device is working properly? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's my advisor, by the way. Putting me on the spot. He always does that. No, yeah, I can. Yeah, I guess I should talk about that. All right, let me. So he is referring to this plot on the right side. So the thing is, why does it look like that, and how should it look like to say yes, the device is working properly? So it looks like this. Let me start by saying this. We're showing here on the x-axis the voltage, the applied voltage to both of the plates at the same time, as we bring them up to 20 kilovolts around. And on the vertical axis, we're showing the ion pump current in microamps that we use as a measure of what's the pressure inside the vacuum enclosure. Now, why does it look like that? Well, as we increase the bias voltage, there is a process in which the metallic surfaces in the presence of high gradients of electric field on their surface create field emission, which is electrons that tunnel through sharp protrusions on the surface and then perturb the vacuum by ionizing residual gases around the enclosures or things of that sort. So you see the pressure coming up as we increase the voltage. We see that the pressure inside the device is actually coming up. Now, how can we use this to say that yes, the device is working properly? One of the things that is very bad from field emission is that sometimes if the protrusions have specific shapes or behavior, there are huge vacuum bursts that perturb the vacuum enclosure and they can result in even worse phenomena, like complete device failure by cascading effects and stuff like that. So if we see spikes coming up and down, we can tell like, whoa, like there's something going on, and that's actually that happened to us. We can say like, whoa, something's going on. We need to try to address what is making these vacuum bursts. That's why we also measure the radiation at the same time. So yeah, like the fact that this plot shows that there are no jumps, that is just increasing as we increase the voltage, is telling us like, okay, the plates are behaving properly. Hope I addressed your question. And there's another question that's from Alex Glandon that says, what is the x-axis of the fringe plot? So let me go back to the fringe plot. So the x-axis, oh, I didn't show it. sorry, my bad. The x-axis of the fringe plot is the like here on the bottom. It's the C position, the position along the longitudinal axis in meters. Yes, in meters. So what we're seeing is the longitudinal direction along the device. So there's another one from Alex Glandon that says, why not confine the beam width to the region where E equals B, or avoid the fringe region? I'm not sure. So the thing is, our beam has a profile as it enters the beam filter that we actually can control with, that we actually do control with other types of instrumentation that we have before the beam filter, focusing solenoids and trajectory correctors. But there is, as you can see in this plot, there is no region where E equals B in the fringe field. So what I'm trying to say is, what we're seeing in the plot is what the beam experiences as it passes where it should pass. So changing the beam width wouldn't really solve the problem, I would say, if I understood correctly, I guess. Yes, exactly. Also, he says, okay, I get it now. This is along the length of the beam field. Exactly. Yeah, it's along those other pictures that we've seen. So that profile is the profile as the particle traverses this line, the red line. Yes. Did I address the questions?
Everybody have more questions? Okay, we're almost running out of time. Thank you so much. Let's begin ahead. Thank you. Yeah. Okay,
well,
hopefully to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Okay. I guess we the engineering students